Alright guys, Crispy from Crispy Stuff here today, and I have bought a lathe. So it's quite small compared to some of the other lathes you'll see around, but I think it'll be alright for starting out with. I have no experience whatsoever in machining, so this is going to be a learning experience. This lathe is a Brenco lathe, which is an old Australian brand, which doesn't exist at all anymore. It's quite old. I believe it's from the 30s. This motor is from 1945 based on the serial number. Overall it appears to be quite a good lathe. There is quite a bit of surface rust on a lot of the parts, but I'm going to try and clean most of that off. The lathe ways are in surprisingly good condition. It doesn't appear to have been used a whole lot. It looks like it spent more of its time sitting in a garage or a shed. The guy I bought it off said he doesn't use it very much. He has another lathe which he used more, which was slightly bigger. So overall I'm quite happy with it. My plan now is to disassemble the whole thing and separate it down into the individual parts. The paint's coming off in a lot of places, so I think I'm just going to take all the paint off and give it a fresh coat. And I'm going to get some phosphoric acid, rust remover, and try and remove rust from some of these parts that have a lot of that surface rust on them and clean things up a bit nicer. So yeah, this is what I got. Oh, it came with a motor. This actually appears to be quite an excessive motor for the size of this lathe. There's the plate on it if you're interested. And yeah, it's got pulleys, so it has no manual, it has no automatic shifting of speeds or any speed control except changing the pulleys. But there are 3 pulley ratios, which should help. It does seem to have oil ports. I'm not exactly sure what kind of oil it takes, and there's no documentation on this lathe at all, really, except for a little bit on lathes.co.uk, but it doesn't tell you what kind of oil to use or anything like that. It's got no power feeds or anything like that, and yeah, it's pretty basic. It doesn't actually have a compound. It's not a straight turning lathe though. Down here, hold on, let me pull this out. You can see that there's a bolt there, so you can still turn tapers, but you can't change the depth of the taper. It's a little bit harder to turn tapers, although I should still be able to turn pretty much any taper, I think. I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I have one particular part in mind that I need to make this a small piece of shaft, and I got quoted to get it machined in excess of $100, and I saw it online for about the same. It was like 150 bucks. I bought this thing for 157 at an eBay auction, so that's Australian dollars as well, which is cheaper than American dollars. So yeah, I think it was a good little deal. I'm gonna start disassembling it and cleaning it up. That's the first step, just to clean all the grease that's caked into everything out. Alright, so I've begun disassembling the lathe. So I took off the hand wheel for the main screw, the lead screw. I don't know if it's called that, seeing it's a no power feed or anything, it's just a screw. But yeah, I took that off, and that allowed me to take off the tailstock and the carriage. And then from the carriage, I actually did this before I took it off the lathe, I took off the cross slide and then all the parts of the tool holder. So I've disassembled most of it, and now I'm going to start working on the tailstock. I figured that's a good place to start. So I just did a little test on the top here. You can see there's no paint there. Just a little bit of acetone in a rag has quite effectively removes the paint. So I think I'm just going to take all the paint off the parts that are really bad like this, and then I'm going to use some rust remover on them to try and get the rust off, then put a fresh coat of paint on them to try and sort of preserve it, because I want it to be in slightly better condition than it is now for the long term. Alright, so I've basically finished disassembling the whole thing, and I've begun to clean up the parts. So the parts that had the paint on them, all the like the tailstock and all the carriage, parts of the carriage, I've removed all the paint with acetone because it was kind of old and gunky, and I'm planning to repaint them. And all the other parts that were sort of rusty, I'm treating with phosphoric acid soaked rags to try and, or paper towel to try and clean some of that off. And then there's some other parts that I can submerge out here, submerged in phosphoric acid to clean them. This is the stuff I'm using. There's the acetone. Anyway, now I'm moving on to the actual body of the lathe. So I'm about to take the angle grinder and try and remove most of the paint with the wire wheel, because doing it with acetone would take forever. I'm not really sure what to do about the headstock because it's like attached onto it with bolts. I could remove it, but I'm worried it'll mess up the alignment, and I can't really acetone it or angle grind off the wire wheel it off because all these parts are still in it, and I don't want to try and take them out. I don't really know how, so I think I'm just gonna have to leave the the headstock. So yeah, I might try and clean it up with some solvent and just paint another layer over it, but we'll see what happens. I'm gonna work on the body first. Alright, I've removed as much paint as I could with the angle grinder, and I just started painting it again. So this is just after the first coat of paint. I've taped up all of the ways and the other bits that I don't want to get paint, so I don't get paint in them and stop the lathe from working how it should. So I'm going to let that first coat dry and move on to some of the other bits and pieces that I need to paint. Just for the record, I'm using this Metal Shield epoxy paint because I figured it would work well. I didn't use a primer. I didn't think it needed it. Everything was pretty clean.